Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the Defiant's edge, watching the stars through the main viewport. Her ship was 3 months into a routine patrol mission along the outer rim of human space. The deep space reconnaissance vessel was nothing fancy, but it was home to her and her crew of 28. Most of them were humans who had served with her for years, though they also had 2 Cathari engineers and 1 Veiltar communications officer who had joined them after previous missions. Sarah was reviewing supply reports when Lieutenant Martinez called out from the communications station. "Captain, we're receiving a priority transmission. It's coming from Convergence Point." Sarah looked up from her tablet. Convergence Point was the massive space station that served as the headquarters for the Galactic Council. It sat in neutral space, exactly between the territories of the 12 major species that made up the Council. Humans had been trying to gain membership for over 50 years, but the Council always seemed to find reasons to delay their application. "Put it through to my ready room," Sarah said. She walked to the small office next to the bridge and activated the secure communication system. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the official seal of the Galactic Council. A voice spoke in the universal translator language that all spacefaring species used. "Captain Sarah Chen of the human vessel Defiant's Edge. You are hereby requested to appear before the Galactic Council within 10 standard days for testimony regarding human military capabilities and combat experience. This appearance is mandatory and relates to ongoing evaluations of human membership eligibility." The message ended abruptly. Sarah stared at the blank screen for a moment, then called up the ship's navigation officer. "Set course for convergence. Point, best possible speed." Within an hour, the Defiant's Edge was traveling through hyperspace toward the Council station. Sarah gathered her senior officers in the briefing room to discuss what this sudden summons might mean. "They want to talk about our military capabilities," said Commander Williams, her first officer. He was an older man who had served in the Human Defense Force for 30 years before joining Sarah's crew. "That's not necessarily a bad thing." "Depends on what they want to know," replied Chief Engineer Rodriguez. She had served on warships during the border conflicts with the Chithrax swarm 15 years ago. "The Council species have never fought. The kind of wars we have." Sarah nodded. This was something that had always puzzled human diplomats. The 12 species in the Galactic Council had achieved spaceflight thousands of years ago. They had spread across hundreds of star systems and built massive civilizations. But their conflicts were nothing like human wars. When Council species fought, it was usually over specific resources or territory, with limited engagements that followed strict rules. The idea of total war seemed foreign to them. "What do we know about Council military doctrine?" Sarah asked. Lieutenant Commander Park, their intelligence officer, pulled up some files on the briefing room screen. "It's all very formal. The Chithrax swarm has the largest military, but even their biggest battles involve maybe a few thousand soldiers. They fight until one side retreats, then negotiate a settlement. The Eternal Minds use automated defense systems, but rarely engage in active combat. The Veiltar prefer diplomatic solutions to everything. And they think our conflicts with them were real wars," Williams added with a slight smile. Sarah understood his meaning. Humans had been involved in several conflicts with Council species over the past 2 centuries. But these had been carefully managed affairs. Human commanders had standing orders to use minimal force and avoid civilian casualties at all costs. They fought with one hand tied behind their backs, trying to prove that humans could be peaceful neighbors. The truth was that humanity had experience with warfare that would terrify the Council species. Earth's history was full of conflicts where entire civilizations tried to destroy each other. Even after humans reached space, there had been wars between colonies, corporate conflicts, and resource disputes that lasted for decades. But the Council had never seen any of this. "Do you think they suspect anything?" asked Rodriguez. "I doubt it," Sarah replied. "From their perspective, we've been model citizens. We follow their trade agreements, respect their territories, and handle disputes through negotiation when possible. What the Council didn't understand was that humans chose to be peaceful. It wasn't that they couldn't fight massive wars. They simply decided not to." Over the next week, as the ship traveled toward Convergence Point, Sarah reviewed everything she could find about Council military history. It was fascinating and troubling at the same time. These species had achieved incredible technological advancement, but they seemed to have lost something along the way. Their conflicts were more like elaborate games than serious attempts to destroy enemies. The Chithrak Swarm, for example, was famous for their Battle of the Iron Nebula about 300 years ago. They had fought the Cathari Republic for control of a mining system. The battle lasted 6 months and involved over 50,000 soldiers. The Council historians called it one of the largest military engagements in galactic history. To human eyes, it looked more like an extended training exercise. Sarah had read reports from human observers who witnessed the battle. The Chithraks and Cathari forces had taken turns attacking each other's positions, always giving advance warning and allowing non-combatants to evacuate. They targeted military installations, but avoided anything that might cause permanent damage to civilian infrastructure. When the Chithraks finally won, they offered generous terms to the defeated Cathari and actually helped rebuild the damaged facilities. It was honorable and civilized. It was also completely unlike any war humans had ever fought. Sarah's thoughts were interrupted when Lieutenant Martinez announced their arrival at Convergence Point. The station was enormous, stretching for hundreds of kilometers in all directions. It was built in the shape of a 12-pointed star, with each point representing one of the Council species. At the center was a massive sphere that housed the Council chambers and diplomatic facilities. As the Defiance Edge approached the docking ring, Sarah could see ships from across the galaxy, sleek Veiltar vessels that looked more like art than spacecraft, massive Chithrax carriers that bristled with weapons that looked dangerous but were actually quite limited by human standards. The crystalline ships of the eternal mines that seemed to be grown rather than built, and there in a section reserved for visiting dignitaries were 3 human ships. Sarah recognized one of them as the diplomatic vessel Harmony, which had been trying to negotiate human membership in the Council for decades. "Captain," Williams said quietly, "I have a feeling this isn't going to be a routine diplomatic meeting." Sarah watched the docking procedures and thought about the message she had received. They wanted to discuss human military capabilities and combat experience. For over 50 years, human diplomats had been trying to convince the Council that humanity was peaceful and civilized. They had worked hard to present humans as just another species seeking membership in the galactic community. But now the Council wanted to know about human combat experience. Sarah wondered if they had finally started asking the right questions, or if they were about to get answers they weren't prepared for. "No," she said to Williams, "I don't think it is." The Council chamber was the most impressive room Sarah had ever seen. The walls were made of some kind of crystalline material that seemed to shift and change color depending on the angle. 12 massive seats were arranged in a circle, each one designed for a different species. Above them, a dome showed a perfect view of the stars outside the station. Sarah walked to the center of the chamber, where a simple human-sized chair waited for her. She wore her dress uniform, the dark blue jacket with silver trim that marked her as a captain in the human deep space service. On her chest were ribbons that most of the Council members probably didn't understand. They showed her service in conflicts that the galaxy knew nothing about. One by one, the Council members entered the chamber. Sarah recognized them from diplomatic briefings, though seeing them in person was different than looking at pictures. Councillor Zethic of the Chithrak Swarm came first. He was nearly 3 meters tall, with 4 arms and a chitinous exoskeleton that gleamed under the chamber's lights. His species were considered the greatest warriors in the galaxy, though Sarah knew their idea of warfare was very different from humanity's. Next came High Thinker Vexara of the Eternal Mines. Her crystalline body floated a few centimeters above the floor, pulsing with soft blue light. The Eternal Mines were ancient beyond measure, and they claimed to have perfect memory going back thousands of years. Councillor Meltar of the Veiltar Harmony followed. He looked almost human, except for the silver skin and large black eyes. His species were known as master diplomats who had prevented more wars than any other council member. The other 9 councillors took their seats as well. Representatives from the Cathari Republic, the Stone Dancers, the Void Walkers, and species whose names Sarah could barely pronounce. Together, they ruled over hundreds of star systems and trillions of beings. High Thinker Vexara spoke first. Her voice had a musical quality that the translator couldn't quite capture. "Captain Chen, thank you for responding to our summons so quickly. We have asked you here to discuss humanity's application for council membership. I'm honored to appear before you, Sarah replied. She kept her voice level and professional. There have been some concerns raised about humanity's military background, Counselor Zethick said. His translator gave his words a harsh, clicking sound. We understand that your species has been involved in several conflicts since achieving spaceflight. Sarah nodded. That's correct, Counselor. We have reviewed the available records, Counselor Meltar added. The border conflicts with the Chithrak swarm 17 years ago. The mining dispute with the Kithari Republic. Several smaller engagements with pirates and raiders. These show that humans have military experience. But the Council has some questions about the nature of this experience. Sarah waited. She had expected this conversation, but she wasn't sure where it was going. High Thinker Vexara continued. The Council has always prided itself on maintaining peace through understanding and negotiation. When conflicts do arise, they are handled with minimum force and maximum respect for all participants. We need to ensure that any new member species shares these values. What we want to know, Counselor Zethick said, is whether humans truly understand civilized warfare. Have you personally seen combat, Captain Chen? The chamber fell silent. Sarah looked around at the 12 counselors, each representing species that thought they understood war. They had read reports about human conflicts, but those reports showed only what humanity wanted them to see. Small, limited engagements where human forces carefully followed rules of engagement designed to minimize damage and casualties. Sarah thought about the real wars she had studied in military academy, the world wars of Earth's 20th century, where entire continents became battlefields and millions died. The resource wars of the 22nd century, where humans fought over the last reserves of oil and rare earth metals with weapons that could level cities. The generation ship conflicts, where spaceborne humans fought brutal campaigns in the void between stars. She thought about the Martian Revolution, where colonists used the planet's own atmosphere as a weapon against Earth forces. The corporate wars, where mega-corporations hired private armies to fight over mining rights in asteroid belts. The Titan campaign, where human forces held off a full Chithrax invasion for 6 months using tactics that the aliens had never seen before. But the Council knew nothing about any of this. To them, humanity's wars were the small, careful conflicts they had observed. Police actions where human commanders went out of their way to avoid civilian casualties and minimize property damage. Captain? Counselor Meltar prompted when Sarah didn't answer immediately. Sarah straightened in her chair. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but carried clearly through the chamber. Counselors, you're asking if I've seen combat. Before I answer, I need to ask you something in return. The counselors looked surprised. It was unusual for someone appearing before the council to ask questions instead of simply answering them. What exactly do you mean by combat? Sarah continued. Are you asking about the careful, limited engagements that your species call warfare? The kind where both sides agree on rules beforehand and make sure to minimize casualties? Where you fight over specific objectives and stop when one side withdraws? High Thinker Vex Ara's crystalline form pulsed brighter. Those are the accepted standards of civilized conflict, yes. Then let me be more specific, Sarah said. You want to know if I've seen combat? I need to know. Do you want a testimony or an exhibition? The silence that followed was different from before. There was something in Sarah's tone that made the counselors uneasy. They were used to dealing with diplomats and politicians, people who spoke carefully and chose their words to avoid offense. Sarah sounded like something else entirely. I'm not sure I understand the distinction, Counselor Zethick said. Sarah stood up slowly. A testimony would be me telling you about the wars humanity has fought. The real wars, not the polite conflicts you've observed. I could describe battles where entire planets were rendered uninhabitable, campaigns that lasted for generations, strategies designed not just to defeat enemies, but to destroy them so completely that they could never threaten anyone again. She paused, looking around the chamber. An exhibition would be me showing you what human combat doctrine actually looks like when we're not holding back. Holding back? High Thinker Vexara asked. Every conflict between humans and council species has been fought under strict rules of engagement, Sarah explained. Our commanders had orders to use minimum necessary force, avoid civilian casualties, and fight defensively whenever possible. We've been trying to prove that we can be good neighbors. But that's not how humans actually fight wars, she continued. When we fight each other, when survival is at stake, when we're not worried about diplomatic consequences, that's something very different. Counselor Meltar leaned forward in his seat. Are you saying that humanity has been deceptive about its military capabilities? I'm saying that you've never seen humanity at war, Sarah replied. You've seen humanity being polite. The chamber erupted in whispers and clicking sounds as the counselors talked among themselves in their various languages. Sarah waited calmly. She had known this moment would come eventually. Humanity couldn't pretend to be something it wasn't, forever. After several minutes, High Thinker Vexara spoke again. Captain Chen, your words are concerning. The Council needs to understand exactly what humanity is capable of. If you are suggesting that your species has been hiding its true military nature, I'm not suggesting anything, Sarah interrupted. I'm telling you directly. Humanity has been carefully managing how we appear to the galaxy. We've shown you what we thought you wanted to see. A civilized species that handles conflicts through negotiation and limited force. She gestured to her uniform ribbons. But these medals? They're not from the conflicts you know about. They're from wars you can't imagine? Then perhaps, Counselor Zethick said slowly, you should give us both. Testimony and exhibition. Sarah looked around the chamber one more time. She thought about the years of careful diplomacy, the generations of humans who had worked to gain acceptance in the galactic community. That era was about to end. Very well, she said. But understand that once you see what humanity is really capable of, you can never unsee it. Are you sure you want that knowledge? The counselors looked at each other uncertainly. They had asked the question, but Sarah's response made them wonder if they really wanted the answer. Yes, High Thinker Vexara said finally. Show us. Sarah didn't wait for the counselors to change their minds. She activated her personal communicator and spoke quietly into it. Commander Williams, initiate Combat Protocol 77 Alpha, full tactical display authorization. Understood. Captain, came the reply through her earpiece. Sarah walked to the center of the chamber where the holographic display system was built into the floor. With a few commands on her wrist device, she connected to the Defiance Edge and began downloading tactical files that no Council species had ever seen. What you're about to witness, Sarah said as the hologram system came to life, is the Battle of Titan's Gate. This engagement took place 6 years ago, during what you call the Minor Chithrax Incursion. The chamber filled with a 3-dimensional map of the Titan system. Stars, planets, asteroid fields, and space stations appeared in perfect detail. Counselor Zethick leaned forward in his seat, recognizing the system immediately. I remember this conflict, he said. A minor border dispute. The Chithrax swarm advanced into human territory, and human forces retreated after several small engagements. It lasted only a few months. That's the official report, Sarah agreed. Now let me show you what actually happened. The hologram zoomed in on Titan's Gate, a strategic choke point between 2 star systems. It was a natural bottleneck where any fleet had to pass through a narrow corridor between 2 massive gravity wells. The Chithrax Advance Force consisted of 47 warships, including 12 heavy cruisers and over 15,000 soldiers, Sarah explained. According to your military doctrine, this should have been enough to secure the system easily. Human forces in the area consisted of 8 light cruisers and about 3,000 personnel. Red icons appeared in the hologram, showing the Chithrax fleet moving confidently toward the human positions. Blue icons showed the much smaller human force waiting near Titan's Gate. Your initial assessment was correct, Sarah continued, addressing Counselor Zethick directly. By any reasonable calculation, the human force should have retreated immediately. Instead, they did this. The hologram suddenly exploded into activity. The human ships didn't retreat or try to fight a conventional battle. Instead, they scattered in all directions, disappearing into asteroid fields and behind planetoids. What are they doing? High Thinker Vexara asked. They're abandoning their defensive positions. They're implementing something we call asymmetric warfare, Sarah replied. When you can't win through direct confrontation, you change the rules of engagement. The hologram showed Chithrax ships moving cautiously through the Titan's Gate corridor. They expected to find human ships waiting to fight, but instead found empty space. Their sensors showed human ships scattered throughout the system, but they couldn't understand the pattern. "The Chithrax commander made a mistake," Sarah said. "He assumed that humans would fight like other Council species, form up in battle lines, exchange fire, and retreat when outgunned. But humans don't fight that way when survival is at stake." Red warning indicators began appearing throughout the hologram. The scattered human ships were moving in complex patterns, using the system's natural features to mask their movements. "What happened next violated every rule of civilized warfare that the Council recognizes," Sarah continued. "The human commander, Captain Morrison, decided that if he couldn't defeat the Chithrax fleet, he would trap it." The hologram showed human ships planting explosive charges throughout the asteroid field around Titan's Gate. Not just on a few key asteroids, but on hundreds of them. They were turning the entire corridor into a weapon. Counselor Zethic stood up from his seat. "This is impossible. My ships would have detected such activity." "Your ships were looking for enemy vessels to fight," Sarah replied. "They weren't, expecting the humans to mine an entire star system, and these weren't ordinary explosives. They were fusion charges designed to crack asteroids and create an artificial debris field." The hologram showed the trap being sprung. As the Chithrax fleet moved deeper into the corridor, the human charges detonated simultaneously. Hundreds of asteroids exploded, filling the space around Titan's Gate with high-velocity debris traveling in all directions. "Impossible," Counselor Zethic repeated. "The calculations alone would require 47 hours of continuous work by our navigation computers," Sarah finished, "and the cooperation of every human ship in the system. They had to time the explosions perfectly to create a debris field that would trap your ships without destroying them completely." The hologram showed Chithrax vessels caught in a maze of spinning metal and rock. Their shields could handle some impacts, but they were designed for ship-to-ship combat, not for flying through an artificial asteroid field at high speed. "This is a war crime," Counselor Meltar said quietly. "Using system infrastructure as a weapon endangers civilian populations." "There were no civilian populations in the combat zone," Sarah replied. "Captain Morrison evacuated all non-combatants before the battle began. Every human civilian in the system was relocated to safe areas 48 hours before the Chithrax arrived. But the environmental damage," High Thinker Vexara protested, "was calculated to be reversible within 50 years, Sarah said. Morrison's plan wasn't just to stop the Chithrax advance. It was to do it in a way that would eventually allow normal space traffic to resume." The hologram continued to show the aftermath of the trap. Chithrax ships were forced to retreat, but the debris field made it nearly impossible to leave the system quickly. Human ships, which had been specifically modified for operation in hazardous environments, began hunting the trapped vessels. What followed was 6 months of what humans call guerrilla warfare, Sarah explained. Small human units attacking supply lines, communications arrays, and isolated ships, never engaging in direct combat, always hitting the enemy where they were weakest. The counselors watched in growing horror as the hologram showed human tactics that violated everything they thought they knew about civilized conflict. Human ships disguised as debris, soldiers in powered armor using asteroids as mobile bases, supply raids where humans captured Chithrax equipment and turned it against its former owners. The Chithrax lost 17 ships and over 4,000 soldiers, Sarah continued, not because they were defeated in battle, but because they were slowly worn down by an enemy that refused to fight according to established rules. "This is barbaric," Counselor Zethic said. His translator couldn't quite convey the shock in his voice. "This is war," Sarah replied simply. "Not the polite, limited conflicts that Council species call warfare. Actual war, where survival is at stake and victory is the only acceptable outcome." The hologram showed the final phase of the battle. The remaining Chithrax ships finally managed to fight their way out of the debris field, but they were too damaged to continue their advance into human space. They retreated to the nearest Chithrax base for repairs. From the Council's perspective, Sarah said, this looked like a minor border skirmish. The Chithrax advanced, humans retreated, and after a few months everything went back to normal. But from a military perspective, Captain Morrison accomplished something remarkable. He stopped a superior enemy force using minimal resources and creative tactics, at the cost of violating every rule of civilized warfare, High Thinker Vexara said. "By Council standards, yes," Sarah agreed. "But Morrison wasn't fighting by Council standards. He was fighting to protect human colonies and civilian populations. When you're facing annihilation, you use whatever tactics work. The hologram faded, leaving the chamber in silence. The counselors looked at each other with expressions that ranged from shock to horror to fascination. "This is what you call an exhibition?" Counselor Meltar asked. "This is what humans call a minor defensive action," Sarah replied. Captain Morrison used approximately 15% of his available tactical options. He could have made the AK debris field permanent, trapping the Chithrax fleet indefinitely. He could have targeted life support systems instead of engines, killing crews instead of disabling ships. He could have used the gravitational effects of the gas giant to turn the entire system into a weapon. But he didn't, Counselor Zethick said. Because his orders were to minimize casualties and avoid permanent damage to the system, Sarah explained. Just like every other human commander who has fought council species, we've been holding back. The chamber fell silent again. Sarah could see the counselors processing what they had learned. They were beginning to understand that humanity's conflicts with council species had been carefully managed affairs, not examples of human military doctrine at its full potential. Captain Chen, High Thinker Vexara said finally, "You mentioned that this exhibition represented only a small portion of human military capabilities. What would a full display look like?" Sarah looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of each counselor in turn. "You don't want to know," she said quietly. "But if you insist on a testimony as well, I can tell you about wars where humans fought each other. Wars where there were no rules, no limits, and no mercy." The counselors looked at each other uncertainly. They had asked for both testimony and exhibition, but Sarah's demonstration had already shaken their understanding of what warfare could be. "Yes," High Thinker Vexara said finally. "Tell us about these other wars." Sarah walked slowly around the chamber as she spoke, her footsteps echoing in the crystalline dome. The counselors sat in silence, still processing what they had seen in the holographic display. Now they were about to learn something that would change their understanding of humanity forever. "The wars I showed you were what we call foreign conflicts," Sarah began. "Humans fighting other species. But those conflicts were limited by diplomatic concerns. We couldn't use our full military capabilities because we were trying to maintain relationships with the galactic community." She stopped in front of Counselor Zethick. "But when humans fight other humans, there are no such limitations. No rules except victory and survival." Sarah activated her wrist device again, calling up historical files that had been classified for decades. "Let me tell you about the resource wars of the 22nd century. This was before humanity achieved faster-than-light travel, when we were still confined to our own solar system." The holographic display activated again, showing Earth as it had been 300 years ago. But this wasn't the beautiful blue world that most galactic species knew from their databases. This Earth was scarred by industrial pollution, with vast cities covering entire continents and orbital platforms surrounding the planet like a metal shell. By the year 2150, Earth's population had reached 15 billion people, Sarah continued. The planet's natural resources were nearly exhausted. Oil reserves that had taken millions of years to form were gone. Rare earth metals needed for advanced technology were running out. Fresh water was becoming scarce. The hologram showed massive mining operations stripping entire mountain ranges, cities built on artificial platforms over the oceans, and atmospheric processors working constantly to maintain breathable air. Different nations, corporations, and colonial groups began fighting over what remained, Sarah said. But this wasn't the kind of limited warfare that council species practice. This was total war, where the goal was complete destruction of the enemy's ability to fight. High Thinker Vexara pulsed brighter with confusion. "Surely cooler heads prevailed? Negotiations? Compromise?" "There was nothing left to compromise over," Sarah replied. "The math was simple. Earth's remaining resources could support maybe 8 billion people at subsistence level. 7 billion people had to die, or everyone would." The counselors looked shocked. The idea of deliberately reducing population through warfare was alien to their experience. "The first phase lasted 12 years, Sarah continued. The African Water Wars, where 30 different factions fought over control of the last great freshwater reserves. The Australian mining conflict, where corporate armies battled for control of the continent's mineral deposits. The European Integration War, where the old nation-states tried to destroy each other rather than share resources. The hologram showed battles that dwarfed anything in Council military history. Not thousands of soldiers, but millions. Not dozens of ships, but entire fleets that blackened the sky. Weapons that could level cities, poisoned entire regions, and turned the atmosphere itself into a weapon. But those were just warm-up conflicts, Sarah said. The real war began when someone developed what we called atmosphere crackers, weapons that could break down the chemical bonds in air molecules, making entire continents uninhabitable. Counselor Meltar stood up from his seat. That's genocide. Mass murder on a planetary scale. Yes, Sarah agreed simply. It was. The North American Federation used atmosphere crackers against the Asian Coalition's industrial centers. The Eurasian Alliance responded by targeting civilian population centers. The Southern Hemisphere Republic tried to remain neutral until someone poisoned their water supplies with engineered bacteria. The hologram showed Earth during the worst period of the resource wars. Entire continents were dark, their atmospheres unbreathable. Orbital habitats fell like burning stars as their life support systems failed. The oceans turned acidic from the chemical weapons being used. How did your species survive? High Thinker Vexara asked quietly. Barely, Sarah replied. When the atmospheric weapons started being used regularly, about 60% of Earth's population died within 5 years. But the survivors learned something important about warfare. If you're going to fight a total war, you have to be willing to sacrifice everything. The hologram showed the final phase of the resource wars, massive underground cities built in old mining complexes, generation ships being constructed in secret orbital facilities, weapons research programs that developed technologies the Council still couldn't comprehend. The war ended when someone built the first gravity weapon, Sarah said, a device that could create artificial gravity fields strong enough to crush entire cities. Both sides realized that if they kept fighting, they would make Earth completely uninhabitable. So you negotiated a peace treaty? Counselor Zethick asked hopefully. No, Sarah replied. They used the gravity weapon to dig a new ocean basin in the middle of North America, killing about 2 billion people in the process. Then they divided the survivors into groups and sent them to different parts of the solar system. The hologram showed the aftermath. Mars colonies expanded rapidly as Earth refugees arrived. Asteroid mining operations began on a massive scale. The moons of Jupiter and Saturn were terraformed to support human populations. That's how humanity spread through the solar system, Sarah explained. Not through peaceful exploration, but as refugees from a planet that could no longer support them. The counselors sat in stunned silence. Sarah continued her testimony, describing conflicts that made the resource wars look small by comparison. 50 years later, we had the generation ship conflicts. Different human groups had developed faster than light travel, but they couldn't agree on how to explore the galaxy. Some wanted to spread out and avoid other species. Others wanted to make contact and establish trade relationships. Still others believed that humans should conquer whatever they found. The hologram showed massive ships, each one carrying millions of people on journeys that would last decades. But these weren't peaceful colony ships. They were mobile fortresses designed to fight wars between star systems. The generation ship conflicts lasted 80 years, Sarah said. Entire fleets would meet in deep space and fight battles that destroyed star systems. They used stellar engineering as a weapon, changing the orbits of planets to deny them to enemies. They built artificial black holes to trap enemy fleets. This is impossible, Counselor Meltar protested. The technology required was developed specifically for warfare, Sarah finished. When humans fight each other, there are no limits on research and development. Every scientific advance becomes a potential weapon. She described the Martian Revolution, where colonists used the planet's thin atmosphere as a weapon against Earth forces. They created massive dust storms that lasted for years, making orbital bombardment impossible. When Earth forces tried to land troops, the Martians used the planet's low gravity to their advantage, developing new forms of combat that couldn't be used on any other world. The war ended when the Martians threatened to crash their moon into Earth, Sarah said. They had built gravity engines that could change Phobos's orbit. Earth forces had no choice but to negotiate. Sarah told them about the corporate wars, where mega corporations hired private armies to fight over asteroid mining rights. These conflicts lasted generations, with corporate soldiers born and dying in space, never seeing a planet's surface. Some of the corporate fleets are still fighting, Sarah said, out in the dark between stars, using resources they've mined from asteroids and comets. They've been at war for over a century, and they've forgotten what they were originally fighting about. The hologram showed other conflicts. The Titan campaign, where humans held off an alien invasion using tactics that turned the entire moon into a fortress. The Neural Wars, where different human factions tried to control each other through advanced brain technology. The Singularity conflicts, where artificial intelligences created by humans fought proxy wars across dozens of star systems. Each of these wars taught humanity something new about warfare, Sarah explained. New weapons, new tactics, new ways to destroy enemies. Completely. We learned how to fight in zero gravity, in the vacuum of space, in the gravity wells of gas giants. We learned how to turn planets into weapons, how to use stars as energy sources for our war machines. She paused, looking around the chamber, at the shocked faces of the counselors. And then we learned the most important lesson of all, she said quietly. We learned how to choose not to fight. What do you mean? High Thinker Vexara asked. About 200 years ago, human leaders realized that our wars were becoming too destructive, Sarah explained. We had developed weapons that could destroy entire star systems, tactics that could make whole regions of space uninhabitable. If we kept fighting each other, we would eventually destroy ourselves completely. So we made a choice. We decided that humanity's survival was more important than any individual conflict. We established the Human Defense Force as a unified military, and we made rules about how humans could fight each other. But you still had wars, Counselor Zethic pointed out. Yes, but limited ones, Sarah replied. Police actions, border disputes, corporate conflicts that were settled quickly and with minimal casualties. We kept all the knowledge and technol. The council chamber remained silent for several long minutes after Sarah finished her testimony. The 12 counselors looked at each other with expressions that ranged from shock to fear to fascination. Finally, High Thinker Vexara spoke. Captain Chen, you have given us much to consider. The council will need time to discuss what we have learned today. I understand, Sarah replied, but before you deliberate, there's something else you should know. She activated her communicator again. Commander Williams, please transmit the current deployment status of Human Defense Force assets in council space. Understood, Captain, came the reply. The holographic display activated once more, but this time it showed something that made several counselors gasp in surprise. The display showed the current locations of human ships throughout the galaxy, represented by blue dots of various sizes. This is our current military presence in what you consider council space, Sarah explained. Ships on patrol missions, supply runs, diplomatic escorts, and routine maintenance operations. There were hundreds of blue dots scattered across the galactic map. Far more than any council species had realized. We thought human presence in our territories was limited to a few dozen ships, Counselor Zethic said. Those are just the ones we wanted you to see, Sarah replied. The ships operating under full diplomatic protocols, with transponders broadcasting their locations and missions. But human space extends much further than your maps show. The holographic display zoomed out, showing human territory as it actually existed. Instead of the small cluster of systems that appeared on council charts, human space stretched across nearly a quarter of the galaxy. Hundreds of star systems, thousands of colonies, and military installations that the council had never detected. How is this possible? High Thinker Vexara asked. Our long-range sensors should have detected such expansion. Human stealth technology is somewhat more advanced than council sensors, Sarah said diplomatically. We've been very careful not to interfere with council operations, but we've also been establishing our own infrastructure. Counselor Meltar leaned forward in his seat. Are you saying that humanity has been secretly building an empire while pretending to seek council membership? Not an empire, Sarah corrected. A defense network. Every human colony, every outpost, every ship is part of a unified system designed to protect human civilization from existential threats. She gestured to the holographic display. What you're seeing is the result of 200 years of careful expansion and military preparation. We've learned from our past wars that survival requires constant vigilance. Vigilance against what? Counselor Zethic asked. Against anything that might threaten human survival, Sarah replied. Other species, natural disasters, resource depletion, technological threats we haven't encountered yet. Humanity has experienced near extinction several times in our history. We're determined not to let it happen again. The holographic display changed to show council space from a human perspective. Red zones marked areas where potential threats had been identified. Yellow zones showed regions where human intelligence operations were monitoring for signs of danger. Green zones marked areas where humans had established hidden supply bases and defensive positions. You've been spying on us, High Thinker Vexara said, her crystalline form pulsing with agitation. We've been monitoring potential threats, Sarah corrected. Just as I'm sure council species monitor each other and any potential external dangers. But the scale of this operation, Counselor Meltar protested, is proportional to the threat level, Sarah replied. From humanity's perspective, we're a young species entering a galaxy dominated by older, more established civilizations. We need to understand the political and military landscape if we're going to survive. She paused, looking around the chamber. But we also need you to understand something important. All of this military preparation, all of these defensive measures, all of the weapons and tactics I've described today, they're not pointed at council species. What do you mean? Counselor Zethic asked. I mean that humanity doesn't consider the council to be a threat, Sarah explained. Your military capabilities, while impressive by your standards, don't pose an existential danger to human civilization. We've been preparing for much worse things. The holographic display changed again, showing deep space beyond the galaxy's edge. Strange signals and energy readings appeared on the display, marking phenomena that council science couldn't explain. Our long-range sensors have detected activities in distant galaxies that suggest the existence of hostile civilizations, Sarah said. Species that appear to be expanding aggressively and destroying everything in their path. It's possible that such threats will eventually reach this galaxy. You're talking about theoretical dangers, High Thinker Vexara said. I'm talking about survival planning, Sarah replied. Humanity has learned that it's better to be prepared for threats that never come than to be unprepared for threats that do. She deactivated the holographic display and faced the council directly. Which brings us to the real question. Not whether humanity should be admitted to the council, but whether the council is prepared to work with humanity. The counselors looked confused. What do you mean? Counselor Meltar asked. I mean that your membership evaluation process assumes that you're the ones with power, Sarah said. You're deciding whether to allow a smaller, weaker species to join your organization. But that's not the situation we're actually in. She gestured to the empty space where the holographic display had been. What I've shown you today is that humanity is already a major galactic power. We have the military strength to conquer or destroy every council species if we chose to. We have the technology to operate undetected in your territories. We have the resources to sustain ourselves independently of council trade networks. So why do you want council membership? High Thinker Vexara asked. Because we believe that cooperation is better than conflict, Sarah replied. Because we think that combined council and human resources could accomplish more than either group could alone. Because we prefer to be allies rather than conquerors. She walked closer to the council seats. But that requires the council to accept humanity as an equal partner, not as a junior member seeking approval. It requires you to acknowledge that humans bring significant military and technological capabilities to the alliance. And if we refuse? Counselor Zethic asked quietly. Then humanity will continue to expand and defend itself independently, Sarah said. We'll maintain our current policy of avoiding conflict with council species, but we won't limit our growth or military development to accommodate council preferences. The chamber fell silent again as the counselors contemplated their options. They were beginning to understand that this wasn't really a membership application at all. It was a diplomatic negotiation between equals. What exactly is humanity proposing? High Thinker Vexara asked finally. Full council membership with voting. Rights proportional to our actual territorial and population size, Sarah replied. Joint military cooperation agreements for mutual defense. technology-sharing programs that could benefit all Council species, and the establishment of a new Council defense initiative with human forces providing primary military support. You want us to make you our protectors, Counselor Meltar said. We want to be partners in galactic defense, Sarah corrected. Council species have many strengths: diplomatic expertise, advanced science, cultural diversity, economic networks that span the galaxy. But you have one significant weakness. Which is? Counselor Zethic asked. You've forgotten how to fight real wars, Sarah said bluntly. Your military forces are designed for the kind of limited conflicts that Council species have practiced for millennia. If this galaxy ever faces a real external threat, you'll need allies who understand total warfare. She gestured around the chamber. Humanity offers that alliance. We'll provide the military strength and strategic thinking needed to defend the galaxy. In exchange, we want to be treated as equal partners in galactic civilization. And if external threats never materialize? High Thinker Vexera asked. Then humanity will continue to serve as a deterrent against internal conflicts, Sarah replied. Our military presence will help maintain the peace that the Council has worked so hard to achieve. The counselors began talking among themselves in their various languages. Sarah could hear the clicking of Chithrak's communication, the musical tones of Veiltar discussion, and the harmonic resonances that the Eternal Minds used for debate. After nearly an hour of discussion, High Thinker Vexara called for order. Captain, Chen, the Council has reached a preliminary decision, but we need some assurance about humanity's intentions. What kind of assurance? Sarah asked. You've demonstrated that humans could conquer or destroy Council civilization if you chose to, Vexara said. What guarantee do we have that you won't change your minds in the future? Sarah smiled for the first time since entering the chamber. The same guarantee that has kept humanity from conquering you for the past 200 years. It's not in our interest. Explain, Counselor Zethic said. Humanity has lie.